Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you, and welcome back to Join the Mahdi. And as always, I'm Ardijan and Mahdi.
And I'm Alexandra Mahdi.
So we've been talking a lot about this idea that we want a homeland, that the Bani Hashim, the believers, want a homeland, just as the children of Israel had their homeland with Moses and the past prophets and messengers from the Old Testament. Then we also talked about how there must be a ruler to rule that divine just state, to rule that homeland, and to secure it, that individual who is a guide for the age. And then after him would be another guide for the age, sent and appointed by God the Almighty. But now I suppose in this episode we can take a little bit of a closer glimpse at what that state is like. What would it be like? What accompanies that kind of state? And I think this is something that a lot of people are interested about, because it's like, okay, what makes your state, what makes your ideal state different than the world state?
Yeah, exactly. And to build a divine just state was actually the mission of all of the prophets and messengers. This is what they were all here. Bear with me, sorry. This is what they were all here, in order to fulfill, basically. They were all sent as leaders. They were all caliphs that God had appointed on the earth. This was their mission. And, the Ahmadi religion of peace and light, although it's a new name, it does not see itself as a new religion, although at the same time it kind of does see itself as a new religion. Because basically, we mean... And what I mean by that, and what we believe, is that all of the religions that exist in the earth, they were continuations of the religions of the prophets and messengers, right? So, for example, Christianity would see itself as a continuation of Judaism. It wouldn't see itself as an entirely new religion, because the Christians, they would believe that they were following in the footsteps of the right path, basically. They were following the one who was truly appointed by God in that day, who was Jesus, and they would believe that, the Jews who rejected him weren't really the true Jews. And the same with the Muslims. The Muslims, they believed that they were the true Christians because they accepted the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family. So Islam saw itself as a continuation of Christianity and Judaism, basically a continuation of that line of successorship of all of the prophets and messengers who came, who were appointed as leaders by God, and we see ourselves as the same. We see ourselves as a continuation of that line of successorship. So we see ourselves as actually the true Jews, the true Christians, and the true Muslims, because we're following that line, of men who was appointed by God, and we're following the man who is appointed by God today, and his mission is the same as all of the previous prophets and messengers, which is to establish a divine just state.
Exactly. And you raised a very good point. This is something that Abu Sayyid has mentioned time and time again, that the prophets and messengers, their whole main goal really, as Abu Sayyid said, was to harmonize society, which basically was to bring about a divine just state. They attempted in their lifetimes, they were not able to, but their efforts, the culmination of all of the efforts, the collective efforts and works of the 124,000 prophets, the 313 messengers, the 5 of the Ulul Azm, all of their works have culminated into this call. Without them, without all of their efforts and works, we would not be in the situation where we are today as believers in terms of fulfilling that promise that God had intended for mankind. And this process has been an ongoing 10,000-year process, but has not really come into fruition until now, after all of these many delays. It was meant to come at the time of Adam, through the Garden of Eden, and we saw a glimpse of what that was like. It was a paradise-like state. And ever since then, it kind of had its on and off moments to a certain degree, like maybe a degree of, like, for example, Solomon, when he ruled his people, there was a degree of a divine just state there. With Prophet Muhammad, there was a degree of a divine just state. But now we're in that time, that pivotal moment in history where we can bring it to its full glory and fruition. And there's even a segment over here in the Goal of the Wise, in the chapter of the events of the rise, and it talks about the process. And it's actually a pretty interesting one, because Abu Sayyid, from his piece, he has a conversation with Ahmed al-Hassan, asking him how much of the world shall be in the divine just state. And the Imam said a lot, but it is not the size that you imagine. So then he said, can you give me an example? So then the Imam tells him, he says, the Arab countries and parts of others, and others in their entirety. So then Abu Sayyid asks, so it will encompass a third of the world, or for example, a fourth? Then the Imam said, he said, what stage are we talking about so that I can answer you clearly? So then Abu Salik, he says, rulership and true kingship was never taken away from you, meaning, God in creation, or Ahmed al-Hassan basically, in order that it may be returned to you, and the entire planet is yours. Everything is between your hands. But from what I understand, the divine just state shall continue to grow throughout the periods of the Mahdis until the entire earth is in the divine just state in the time of the 12th Mahdi, Muhammad ibn Zahra, and alayhi salam. And there's not a single country out of it. So during the time period of dawn, meaning the time of the 12th Imam, which is Imam Mahdi, and noon, which is Imam Ahmed al-Hassan, which countries will be in the divine just state, meaning during these times? So the Imam alayhi salam, long story short, basically he says, we shall take a piece of land and lose others, and then lose another, until we control all of it and have control over all parts of the globe. This will happen between the first, throughout all the periods of the Mahdis until the last Mahdi. And then Abu Salik, he says, all praises due to God. Then the Imam responds saying, the worst time period will be in the rule of Adam. And then he said, from which aspect? He said, in terms of treachery and backstabbing. So over here we see that the full-on exposure of the divine just state on earth, as it is in heaven, will not be until the time of the 12th Mahdi, which is generations ahead of us. But the thing is that we're planting the seed of a divine just state in this day and age. And from what we have gathered from the teachings of Abu Sadiq, that this divine just state will be first implemented in the Middle East. It has nothing to do with the West. But we rise from the West first, as the Mahdi rises from the West. And our main goal is to establish a state, and that would take place in the Middle East.
Exactly, like Abu Sadiq from Himsby said, we're looking for a homeland, just like the Jews are looking for a homeland, and it is going to be some considerable time before the greater divine just state is established. But we are, like you said, in the period of the rise right now, and the divine just state it will be begun, it will be established, it will exist in our lifetime. And that is why it says on the flag of Abu Sadiq, from him his peace, what you've been promised has arrived, because this is really what humanity has been waiting for. It's what humanity has been promised by God, God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. This is what all of the religions have been preaching. This is what all of the prophets and messengers, like I said, were trying to do. But now is the time when the promise of God is there, that it is going to happen, and it's going to be established. However that happens is up to God. It's an amazing time to be in the world. It's an amazing time to be a believer, and to be one of the ones who helps build that divine just state. And Abu Sadiq, from his piece, he said, that the community who is living around him is it's a mini version of the divine just state. It's kind of like a prototype, like you would have like a pilot episode for a TV series. This community is showing how the divine just state it functions.
And this is basically to showcase to the people how the divine just state will be. This is just a little model, a little piece of the divine just state, which is our community, in which everybody is equal. Everybody sees one another as family, and that there is no racism, and everybody is able to eat and sleep and have everything the same, no matter what it is that they're doing. Some people, maybe perhaps they work as a plumber. Maybe somebody works as an electrician. Another person works as a doctor. But the thing is that there is no greed. There is no seeking to attain a maximum amount of wealth in order to attain happiness. No, the beauty about the divine just state, so far as we see it in our community, is that the happiness of others and the well-being of others is actually what fulfills us. Our whole life is dedicated to the fulfillment of other people, the enjoyment of other people, rather than the enjoyment of ourselves. And it's a very interesting teaching that when you put into practice, you'll find that it is a true teaching, which is that once you stop focusing on how to make yourself happy, whether it's by hoarding or gambling or drinking or whatever it is that makes people happy.
Just getting what you want, basically.
Yeah, so instead of doing that, because it's just going to be a temporary fix, it's going to be like a temporary dopamine effect. But if a person really wants to be happy, just as Abu Salik said, true happiness lies in the happiness of others.
Yeah, exactly. So in the divine just state, we believe in humanity first. We believe in putting our, fellow human being ahead of our own self. This is how we generate true happiness for ourselves, and this is how we end up living a life of peace. And we can only truly learn how to do this when we're living with the Imam at the time, when we're living with the Caliph that God has appointed. This is why it's so important that we find and we accept the leader that God has appointed, and this has always been the point and the core of the religion, because when we build a better world that we're living in, we understand how to stop generating our own negative karma. We generate our positive karma. We're not being oppressed by other people. We're not oppressing other people anymore without even realizing it some of the time. We're not living in these situations of extreme inequality because, we believe that this is how we truly get justice. Just like we were talking about yesterday, the Republic by Plato, true justice, as Plato describes, is placing everything in its correct place. And we believe that Plato was a prophet who was sent by God, and we believe that true justice and everything being placed in its correct place can only happen when we have God doing the placing, because God is the one who knows the unseen. He's the only one who has the ability to know where everything is best suited. And we believe that this is a religious obligation to establish this divine just state. Like we said, we believe this was the purpose of all of the prophets and messengers. This is what the religion has always been about. The prophets and messengers were all leaders. And so establishing this divine just state, establishing this prototype of the divine just state, it's the greatest act of worship that we can do right now. This is how we can be in service to God, how we can uphold our obligations to God by supporting him as a leader, by taking him as a leader, and by obeying him as a leader. This is how we are going to live in obedience to God. And we're living in very extreme times at the moment. I don't think anyone would deny that, having looked at the news over the past couple of days. For sure it seems as though we're on the brink of World War III and other disasters which are happening, fulfilling all of these end times prophecies that we've been waiting for to come to pass, and I think the majority of the people, they know deep down that we are living in the end times, because we have this instinct basically that this is happening, as humans. And I think even atheists know that that we are approaching this extremely difficult tribulation, and so if we're in this situation where the world is only going to get worse and worse, this amount of suffering is going to get worse and worse, then the only safe place to be is with the Imam of the time. It's with the man that God appointed in the divine just state. That is the safe place to be in the earth. That is the place which is going to be protected by God. That is the ark of salvation, basically, in the flood that is coming. And like I said, the world is already a pretty bad place, for many people. It's already full of a lot of suffering. It's already full of a lot of inequality and darkness and poverty and all of these other problems which humanity has caused for each other and caused for themselves when they followed these tyrants and these leaders who are not appointed by God. It's how we build a better life on this earth regardless.
Yeah. But, the interesting thing is that, the world that we see today, as you're saying, it's filled with injustice. Wars are taking place, especially this whole thing right now with between America and Iran. Just before we came up on the show, I was just watching a video in which somebody was talking about how Ali Khamenei and his family members are actually leaving and exiting out of the country and leaving their people behind. So that just goes to show you that they, just as Abu Sadiq said, he said, your leaders are traitors. Your leaders have nothing to do with God. Your leaders, and he said, you will see it. You will see it, like their hypocrisy will be exposed. And all these people that are saying that, we have to defend Iran, or we have to defend this place, or we have to defend that place. So we see that they leave their own countries in fear, or rumors about them leaving their own countries starts to come out. And, that just goes to show that, they're not putting their money where their mouth is, really. Because, the thing about Iran, too, is that, they love to promote this idea that they kind of establish a divine just state, or that this is a state of the Mahdi, and that they would say that, if Imam Mahdi, alayhi salam, the 12th Imam, they said it openly. This is by Khomeini, his own words, in which he said that if Khomeini was going to be, if Imam Mahdi alayhi salam were to be against the state, then it is allowed to even kill him. It's allowed to end his life. So that just goes to show you the kind of mentality and what they're willing to do, that they're willing to kill and destroy their own imam for the sake of their own country. But like it seems like Khamenei is more than happy to leave that country because he's and his family, because they're afraid.
For sure.
But that's something that the Imam of the time would never do. He would never abandon his flock. He would never abandon his people. He would be somebody who would protect his people and do anything to protect his people. So, we're not on any side here, just as an FYI regarding the wars that are taking place. And we hope that these wars stop, and we wish for these wars to stop. And we do not wish that anybody out there on both sides suffer any longer than need be. We have warned people that a punishment was coming. We were warning people of wars coming. We were warning people that we are in the brink of a serious global catastrophe, a global war. And if we continue the way that we are, it will only get worse. And yet, even though we speak, Alex, on this program, warning the people, we see that which we speak about happens because the Mahdi alayhi salam told us, Abu Sadiq, from him his peace, told us these events would happen. We give that out to the world, but the world doesn't believe us. Then they go on and they mock us. And as they're mocking us, the signs are taking place. And instead of repenting and instead of thinking to themselves like, well, these guys just spoke about this on live TV and on TikTok live.
Abu Sadiq, from him his peace, was saying this years ago. He was making these predictions which are coming true before our eyes years ago about these wars and how they're going to get worse, and you're exactly right. This is what should be waking the people up. The Quran says that God doesn't send a punishment until he sends a messenger to warn, and that's what Abu Sadiq, from him his peace, has been doing. He has been warning the people since 2015, and he's still warning the people. And like you say, Ardijan, this punishment is actually taking place like in front of our eyes, and we still see the people reacting this way. We still see the people rejecting. We still see the people mocking. We still see this anger and hatred which is coming from the people, to this dawah. And like we said, all of the prophets and messengers, they were sent as leaders. They were sent as caliphs. The original one was Adam. He was commanded. The angels were commanded by God to prostrate to Adam when he was appointed, and the one who couldn't do that was Iblis. The one who had this anger and hatred towards Adam as a caliph was Iblis. So if you find yourself, in your heart, when you hear Abu Sadiq, from whom his peace, and you find yourself with that anger and that hatred in your heart, you have to take a moment, and consider what the story we have in the Quran recorded very clearly for you. Where is that anger coming from? Is that something that you need to fight against and do something about and discipline yourself and purify your own heart? Because, for sure, if our emotions are echoing the same emotions as Iblis, then we're never going to become guided to the right path. We're going to end up following in the footsteps of Iblis and the footsteps of Cain and the footsteps of all of the people who fought against the prophets and messengers. And that's a sorry way to be in any day and age. It's an awful way to be, but today and this time when we're approaching this huge punishment, that is an extremely pitiful way to be. It's an extremely sad way to be, and it's something that we can change. We can change what is within ourselves. And God said, the Quran says that God doesn't change the condition of the people until they change what is within their own selves. So if we want to change our condition, if we want to change our situation, about what is happening in the world right now, we have to change what is in our own selves. We have to stop. We have to declare ourselves innocent from all of these tyrants and innocent from the world, and pledge allegiance to and follow the man who is appointed by God today. That is the only way. But I also want to specify as well one point that's important to make. We're extremely peaceful people. We don't believe in destabilizing peace in any region. We believe that the divine just state, like you said, will be given to Abu Sadiq, from whom his peace, by God in an Arab country. For sure, we would never attack people, just like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family. He never, even though he has this, he's been slandered and his reputation has been tarnished due to rumors about him, but he never went and attacked people. If he ever raised the sword, it was in defense. And this is, for sure, we would never ever try and invade or take a country by force or anything like that. That is not, part of the plan. But this is what we believe. We believe that it is a promise of God that the divine just state will be established in our lifetime, and this is something that he will give us.
Exactly. This is something that he will give us, and it will happen in our lifetime. And he's already given it to us, at least a pilot version of it, or at least like a teaser version of it, because there's a lot more to come. You know, one of the things that he spoke about that would happen in our state, that he mentioned in the Goal of the Wise in Door 33, which is about the divine just state, he mentions this thing about a currency in the financial system, where there is no currency, basically. In the divine just state, gold would be the currency initially, but then it would be replaced with like a bartering system.
Yeah.
Which is great because, I mean, like if everybody has a job, right? If everybody is working with something, then whatever service or whatever goods that they have, it can be traded for services and for goods. So for example, let's say, for example, I'm a electrician, right? I fixed, for example, something in your house, and in turn, because you're sewing clothes or you're producing clothes, the currency would be, instead of you giving me money, you can give me any clothing that I perhaps need or ask for. Yeah, I need some new socks, or hey, a t-shirt would be nice. So, and it's beautiful. Why? Because everybody in the divine just state already has enough of everything. That's the idea, that everybody has enough. There is no greed. So simple services, and services of all kinds, whether it's defending the nation, or whether it's supplying food for the nation, or entertainment for the nation, or cleaning up the streets, we all serve one another. Yeah. And we are all basically in a system that allows us to be fulfilled in all senses, fulfilled in a spiritual sense, where we are upon the truth and we're able to be guided towards elevation, and a physical sense in terms of our bodies and our health and our emotional well-being.
Exactly. You know, it's the idea that by fulfilling the needs of other people, we're having our own needs fulfilled by them, you know, in return. And, you know, like you said, the system will be bartering. We won't be using money, and this will give people no opportunity, you know, to hoard money at other people's expense like they do today, which is, you know, a major problem in the world today, that we have like so many people becoming billionaires and even like trillionaires, while other people are starving to death. You know, 25,000 people per day are dying of starvation, and this is something which will be unheard of in the divine just state. You know, everyone will have more than they need, and everyone will have abundance, actually. You know, the narration about Imam Ali, it states that, you know, if people had accepted Imam Ali, they would have been eating from above and below them, and from their right and from their left, because the people would have been provided for, and they would have had what they need. And, you know, to be in the divine just state, it's about a return to the Garden of Eden, basically, you know, where God, he provides for the people, because they are living in this obedience to God. And this is how we re-enter the Garden of Eden. You know, the humanity and Iblis were chucked out of the Garden of Eden for disobedience to God. So the way that we get back is by obedience, you know. And Abu Sadiq from whose piece, he said that when people were in the Garden of Eden, they would just wish for something and it would appear. So it's this idea of having this like abundance, like versus the world that we're living in now, which is like lack. We're always in lack of something. We're always in need of something. And even if we have more than we need, it's like this kind of survivalist mentality where we just like want to hold on to everything that we have, and you know, feel fear basically about being provided for. And that's the opposite way that we should be. You know, in the world that we're living in, you know, Abu Sadiq from whose piece, in the chapter before the divine just state chapter, in chapter 32, it talks about the Antichrist Dajjal and the Antichrist system, basically, which is like the me first mentality, which is capitalism, you know, where people, and it seems like almost fair when you describe it, you know, that people can take as much as they can. But when you think about it, it's like this survival of the fittest mentality, right, where people end up taking the strongest, they end up taking so much more than they need and hoarding that, and living lives of like complete luxury, which never even make them happy anyway, and leaving so many people with nothing. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family, he said, if you see a poor person, you can know that is because someone else has taken their share, basically, because God has provided enough sustenance on the earth for everyone to have what they need. So when we see the people who are going without, that is because we live in a world where it is possible for some people to take so much more than they need. And if you think about it, this is criminal. And the fact that we have 25,000 people dying per day, this is actually genocide. You know, this is the conscious killing of those people. So it's extremely disturbing, it's an extremely evil system that we live in. And Abu Sadiq, from whom his peace is said, that in the divine just state you will go out to feed the hungry, you'll go out to house the homeless and help the poor, and you'll find none, because they won't exist in the divine just state. You won't even have the ability to do those good deeds to help humanity, like you can have today.
It would be a thing of the past, and it's like made it clear that even this aspect of money, the way that it changes from a money system to a bartering system, is an interesting one, where basically there's this chemical reaction that the Imam knows about, where they're able to actually produce gold. Yeah. So if you're able to produce gold, well, then gold would be equal to the value of dust. Yeah. Because now it's something that you can make easily. It's something that is widely available. Because the value of gold comes from its rarity. It doesn't come from anything else. It's not like the gold bar suddenly like makes energy happen. No, it's the idea behind its value is due to its rarity, that people decided, hey, we're going to place a value of currency based on this piece of hunk of metal or a hunk of stone, and call it value, call it a currency. And we'll make and print out a whole bunch of papers that are basically an IOU. And this is how we're going to live, and this is how we choose to live. It's actually an insane system if you think about it. But it is an insane system, and it's an unnatural system as well.
Yeah,
it's completely unnatural. It's not like you see squirrels and bears and all the dwellers of the animal kingdom trading off of IOUs and pieces of stones and silver and gold. Yeah, this is not how it works. And even energy, by the way. It's a very interesting one, because in modern society you have to pay for energy. It's energy doesn't come free. Nothing in life is free. Even if you were to build solar panels for yourself, you have to pay an arm and a leg for solar panels, really. Yeah. But with the Mahdi, alayhi salam, his idea is that no, and even energy should be free. And it's actually interesting, even over here in the Goal of the Wise, he mentions that petrol and energy will no longer have any value, because the salt water of the seas is the greatest source of energy. That's amazing. Salt water of the seas shall replace petrol, and it will not be polluting to the environment. So there you have it. Even to this degree, so corporations out there, they don't want the Mahdi, because now if you're going to replace petrol, which the companies are creating, and they're digging up, these oils, and they're turning them into gas and all these things from crude oil. We find that the Mahdi is basically saying that actually salt water in the sea, which you can just get easily, you just have to go to the sea and just collect salt water. This is actually more valuable. This is actually more resourceful, and it's the greatest source of energy compared to petrol. I mean, that by itself already tells you that if he can do that, just with salt water, imagine what he can do for everything else.
Exactly.
Currency now is being replaced, energy is being replaced, and even satellite channels and satellite companies. He's going to ensure that even they go bankrupt pretty much in the Goal of the Wise. So there's just so much to go about it regarding the divine just state. I don't think we'll be able to cover it in this segment, but there's just so much already that you can already feel that, wow, if everything is already taken care of, all the energy is taken care of, transportation, entertainment, all this stuff is taken care of. I mean, what else can't he do?
Yeah, there's no need to be so dependent for our way of life on these massive soulless corporations who are making a profit out of us. We only feel dependent on them because they're telling us they are, and it's all an illusion. Like, can you imagine that, like salt water fueling cars? Like, think about all of the pollution that petrol causes. Think about all of the wars it causes. And, the only benefit to having petrol, as a fuel is the fact that it it places all of the money in the hands of the people who have access to it and who own it, you know, and that's why, it's a good system for them, because it allows them to have that financial control over the people, because everyone needs a car today, so yeah, imagine that if we could have our cars running off salt water, and this is what, the Ahlul Bayt, this is the knowledge that they have and they're able to provide, in order for us to have a much simpler way of life and a much more a much more useful way of life, a way that everything is just running better. And yeah, for sure, this is how we should be living. This is how God intended us to live in the divine just state, not just giving all of our money and giving all of our power and all of our time away to a few people who are making a huge profit out of the majority.
Yeah, and Abu Sarika from MS Peace, when it comes to this, I remember there's actually an article out there. Actually, it's not even just an article. I mean, it's something known. This is something that people can investigate and look into. But there was actually somebody a few decades ago who actually found a way how to use salt water as a way to fuel his car. And this was really revolutionary. This was something that, for a fact was going to put the petrol companies and the gas companies out of business. What they ended up doing because of him discovering this and him making it work is that they killed the man, actually. They killed him for coming up with this idea. Why? Because corporate greed, Alex. Corporate greed. Nobody wants a cure if you're greedy. Nobody wants efficiency if you're greedy. Everything for them has to come with a price. And obviously you cannot put a price on seawater because it is widely available.
Anyone can just go and get it. Yeah, exactly. So this is what the divine just state is about. It's about us having a way of life which is free from oppression from other people, where we have freedom, where we have the ability to actually enjoy our life, where we have the ability to work, out of passion for something that we enjoy doing for the honor of, benefiting our fellow human being and for the, in order to make our own selves happy and at peace, So this is how God wants us to live. And this is how, we will be able to live when we take God as a ruler. So that's all it's about, And another important aspect of the divine just state is that we also believe that in the divine just state, there's going to be freedom of religion. We don't believe there's any compulsion in religion. This is what the Quran says, and we believe there's never been any compulsion in religion, So it's up to people what religion they want to follow and what books they want to take and what jurisprudence they want to follow. And Abu Sadiq from Whom Is Peace in The Goal of the Wise, he said, that people will be judged by the books they want to follow. If someone wants to be a Christian, then that's fine. It's up to them. No one's going to force them to take a different faith. But they will have to be judged by the jurisprudence, meaning that, for example, they wouldn't be allowed to get divorced because that's what Jesus said, he made divorce forbidden.
Yeah. So like if a person is a Christian that believes that Jesus is the finality of the laws and he is the last person that God sent. Well, if you hold on to that, as an example, he said there's no such a thing as divorce, so then Christians would be forced to not have divorces. Well, not forced, but like in the sense of that, well, this is your laws, you have to abide by it. Every country has a law system, they have a penalty system, they have things that allow harmony to remain in society. And for sure, yes, I mean, and that's an interesting fact and aspect, is that in such a religious state, because we're saying that it's a religious state, this religious state allows freedom of religion. So if a person is a Muslim, they're not going to be forced to believe in the Imam of their time. If a person is a Christian, they're not forced to become Muslim. If a person is a Jew, they're not forced to become a Christian or a Muslim. If a person is a Buddhist or a Hindu or even an atheist, nobody is forced to believe anything. The only thing that is required of a citizen in the divine just state is to keep the harmony of society and to allow people to live the way that they choose to live and to not interfere with their lives. This is, I think, the minimum that everybody wants for themselves. And therefore, if you want it for yourself, you should also want it for others, because that's one of the biggest laws that we have, actually. Do to others what you would want done for yourself. So if you don't want people being up in your business and being nosy about your beliefs and trying to force you to convert to another religion, well then, if you can't accept it for yourself, then don't do it and don't impose it upon others. We don't accept it for ourselves, so we would never impose it upon others. And the Mahdi doesn't accept it for himself, so he would never impose it on others. And what's really cool, actually, another really, really amazing thing, right? Which I think tops and trumps almost everything about the divine just state, is this amazing idea that a lot of people have been struggling with. People struggle with this idea of mortality. Everybody struggles with this idea that, oh man, one day I'm going to die. And life is too short. Life is too short. Some people, they die in their 20s. Some people, they die because of a disease they contracted simply by a bee or an ant or some insect that bit it. Some people, they they get scratched by their cat and they suddenly have Lyme disease or
they
something.
just, they just get old and they get sick and they die. This is one of the hard facts of life that people hate the most, that they avoid thinking about.
And everybody always says life is too short.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is probably something that a lot of people will find hard to believe, but if anybody has faith in God, well, then they would understand and know that, well, Adam and Eve, for example, in the Garden of Eden, they were meant to live forever. They were meant to abide there forever.
Yeah.
They were meant to, procreate and multiply, but there was no such a thing as death for them.
Yeah, that's what Christians believe, that death was brought into the world by by
their own deeds, by sinning. Yeah. And it's funny that, since we're in a new covenant, this new covenant comes with new laws and jurisprudence, but it comes with God's promise, and that is, if it's, the return to the Garden of Eden. Ahmed al-Hassan says in the book, The Goal of the Wise, in his conversation with Abu Sadiq, he says, in the divine just state, medicine will advance to the point that people will overcome death and disease. I said, meaning Abu Sadiq from his piece, he said, so no one will die anymore and people will live forever? The Imam from his piece said, they will still die, but not from old age or from diseases. So basically, a person cannot die from old age or diseases. So these two things you can push aside.
Yeah.
And then he says, the cures to all diseases will be given and people will no longer die of old age, for there will be a reversal of aging. So no one would age any longer. You would stop at a certain point and you could even reverse your age to a certain point. People will still die of natural accidents or if somebody killed them. So there's only two ways to die in the divine just state. It would be that somebody would have to physically take your life. They would have to murder you. Or there would have to be a natural accident. So like, for example, maybe an earthquake and a building crushes over you. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you fall into, a volcano, God knows what. But like an accident would have to take place for a person to die. So no one would die anymore from diseases, from pains, and from old age. None of this stuff would exist in the divine just state. I even remember Abu Sadiq from his piece also mentioning, and this is something that Dr. Irfan also speaks about too, how even meditation, actually meditating, is a cure for many ailments, and that actually in the future as we progress, meditation would actually be a replacement for even some medicines actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, these secrets, they're going to be unlocked for sure in the divine just state when we are living, under that leader, that ruler who is appointed by God, and like we said, all of the prophets and messengers, they came as kings, some of them did rule countries, but many of them did not, but they were still supposed to be obeyed, right? They were still supposed to be obeyed by the people who were following them rather, the people who are believing in them, and we believe that the kingdom of God is actually, even if there's just one believer who's following the divinely appointed imam at the time, then it's still the kingdom of God around them. They're still living in God's kingdom on earth, because that is the whole purpose of it, regardless of how many people are following him, so this is the whole point of the religion. It's obedience to the king who's appointed by God, and that is the way that we worship God. And Abu Sadiq from his piece, he says in The Goal of the Wise that God, he does not recognize these kingdoms of Satan or the rulers appointed by Satan or chosen by the people. So the only king and kingdom which God recognizes is the king whom he appointed. So as such, and this was written a while ago in The Goal of the Wise, even though we do not have a land which is governed by us at the time of this writing, we still have a state and a people and a flag and a God. Our people are believers and our state is the community of believers who are governed by the Qayyim Riser. And there's a quote from Ahmed al-Hassan from his piece, which is really important, for anyone who is a believer in this religion. So Ahmed al-Hassan, the first Mahdi, he said, "It is sufficient for the believer that he is paving the path for our divine just state and for the authority and rule of God." It is sufficient for the believer that he is paving the path for our divine just state and for the authority and for the rule of God. And so he says this 3 times, and he says, "My beloved son, we do not force anyone to do anything. Everyone is free to do what they want to do, but if someone chooses to operate independently, that which he chose, he can do. We do not mind, but he must do it away from our system and our laws and our state. So if people they want to be a believer, they don't even have to live in the divine just state if they don't wish to follow the laws. But this is the fact that this is the job with a believer right now. It's to pave the path for the divine just state. This is really the most important thing that any of us can be doing, right? There's nothing else that is worth focusing on in this life. There's nothing else that is worth building, because if we can be a part of those ones who actually build the divine just state, the actual establishment of a state which all of the prophets and messengers, they were trying to achieve. The world outside, it's dying, it's chaos, it's run by these tyrants, it's run by these leaders who are appointed by Satan. So for the believer, for sure there's nothing more important that we can be doing in this time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think anybody who hears what we're talking about and says to themselves, I'm a believer in this call. I totally have read the Goal of the Wise. I believe what it says about the divine just state. I am a believer. Great, you're a believer. God bless you. Thank you for your Pledge of Allegiance. But now it's also about fulfilling that Pledge of Allegiance. That means what? That means to enable the man appointed by God. It's supporting the man appointed by God. Anything less than that is for sure a shortcoming. And we have to consider ourselves as shortcomers. Even in the Goal of the Wise, Abu Sadiqa from His Peace had stated that, Ahmed al-Hassan from His Peace said that even the 12th Imam, Muhammad ibn al-Hassan al-Askari, considers his own self to be a shortcomer. So if the Ahlul Kisa, if the Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet, who are greater and better than all of us put together, if they can consider themselves shortcomers, then what are we? For sure, exactly. We're extreme shortcomers. And, that's where I think we need to turn the tables now. I think we need to stop being selfish. I think we are people that, we become happy when we hear amazing, great information, and we become supportive of it, in our hearts. But now we must be supportive of it and through our actions. We have to now come forward. We have to put everything forward for the Imam and to bring about that divine just state. No more wars, no more crimes, no more people dying and struggling to breathe as they're on their deathbed because they're dying of old age. No more violence and no more injustice, especially no more injustice. All of this is a combination of injustice. Injustice is what? Injustice is putting things in the wrong place, right? Because justice is what? Justice is putting things in its right place. For sure, God created the human being to be happy. God created the human being to elevate and to know Him, not to slave away at some evil corporation working a 9-to-5 job and then going to sleep to a spouse that probably doesn't even like you and is probably seeing somebody else. This is not why we came. What we came to do as human beings is to be human and to know God, because God created man in His image. So why not use the time that we have on earth for the betterment of society, rather than being the fuel for the fire of chaos and the fuel and the fire of corruption that faces the earth. And that's why, and now it makes a lot of sense, like when a person contemplates. That's why it makes sense why the Ahlul Bayt in general have said that 3 people will not go to paradise. It will be the judge, it will be the tax collectors, I believe, right?
Yeah, and the police officer.
And the police officers.
He said that God will not even look at those people on the day of judgment, because these are the people who are upholding the system of the tyrant and, the system of chaos. I liked what you said, that we're people, our actions as we're living on the outside, even though if we feel we're passive, even if we feel we're not, openly and actively supporting the system, we are still fueling the fire of chaos, because we're living in a system that we're benefiting it, we're paying into it, and it's not benefiting us, it's not benefiting anyone else, it's just continuing it, it's just making it carry on for longer and longer, this like limitless amount of pain and suffering which is out there. This isn't how God wanted us to live. He didn't create this system, He didn't create this world that we're living in, which is just basically a world of suffering. He wanted us to be living in peace and happiness, around the man that He appointed. He wanted us to be in paradise, but the only way that we can live in paradise is if we actually obey Him, if we take God as a king. That's the only way that we can enter back into paradise. If we keep following and obeying tyrants or following and obeying our own selves, we won't get there. We're just going to make our own situation worse and worse, exactly. for this life and the hereafter.
Exactly. So if anybody wants that they're in God's good books, and if anybody says that they love God, well then we must do the works of God, because God is not going to accept anything less than that. Because we then become the problem. If we don't support the man, we become the problem. We become fuels and fire for that problem. Anyway, I hope that this has all reached you well, and I hope that you all contemplate about this. And for the people out there, pledge allegiance to the Imam of your time and support the Imam of your time, because this is why we have all returned today. This is why we have reincarnated. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.